Welcome to the South Burlington School Board meeting. And I will start with comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda. All right, seeing none. Any amendments to the agenda, David?
Not that I see at the moment. I know I was trying to think about. I think we're okay. Some of the monitoring reports may be shorter, but we're going to try to keep them all. Here's Cole.
All right.
So we're good.
Hey, Cole. All right. Oh, we'll give you a minute to settle in. We're right on your agenda item. Maybe I'll start with David. Do you have any announcements?
Yeah.
Give Cole a chance to breathe.
Again, a lot of activities going on. Cole will probably hit on some of them. Obviously, if you tried to find a parking spot at the end of the day, we had track meet going on here. So between the student dismissal time and track meet starting, it was a little busy out there. I've heard that. The other thing is I want to just let the folks know that the reason that we had a early dismissal yesterday because in the city of South Burlington we had a major water main break. It happened to be right across in Dorset Commons, which is right across the front entryway or the entryway of the high school. Actually not right there, but somewhere in that development. There was a major water break that actually affected all of our schools with the exception of Orchard, although we aren't totally sure that they weren't affected too. But what that means is they had no water pressure. We had no water to, run sinks, flush toilets, etc. And the reason for the decision was based on just the return to resolve was unknown. We waited about, almost hour and 45 minutes, close to 2 hours. They still had not determined where the problem was. So given that, we made the decision to start to early dismiss. So we dismissed 11:45 for the high middle with the idea that we thought, some of the students who have younger siblings could be there. We did our best to get students served lunch at the elementary as well as the high school. But again, an unfortunate and chaotic process. But our office obviously was very busy, business office, etc. Many phone calls were flying in, but we haven't heard a lot of additional feedback. From what I understand, the issue's been at least isolated. I don't know if it's been resolved, isolated, and that we're back on. We are also worried about a boil water order, and we were confirmed that we didn't need to do that. We did go ahead and plan for today. We did get a pretty sizable amount of bottled water so that we could carry on school. Again, that we had water, we could flush toilets, but if we needed it for drinking, we would have that on hand. And we do have that on hand now, and we'll continue to use it or need it. If we need it, we'll have it available. So that's my kind of not so fun announcement.
So just to clarify, the Marcotte and Chamberlain were affected?
Marcotte, Chamberlain, and Marcotte, Chamberlain, high school, middle school, all.
Even that far
That's
away
right.
From the main?
Yeah, it's a main feed. So the water tower on Dorset Street, the water tower, and those of you who know the water tower got extended. It adds pressure to the system. That's what pressurizes the system. Somewhere they weren't sure until later that it was Dorset Commons, but that major leak dropped all the water pressure, right? Because major water leak going on. So we had we had no water pressure, essentially. That's what that does. So it's all the back pressure that is created by the city, and it took them a long time to isolate it. So all 4 schools, and again, we weren't exactly sure of Orchard, but Orchard is definitely lower on elevation, and so maybe just by what they say is head pressure, they may have been okay, enough volume in the pipes and stuff that allowed them to have the water pressure. So again, not my very fun announcement, but that was what happened. Cole, take it away.
Yeah, that's the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So on that, there is a track meet, and there was very little parking. So the juniors will be taking the Vermont State Science Assessment on May 3rd, which was rescheduled from a previous date because they didn't have the assessment available. For Speak Week, tomorrow's presenter is Jason Lutz, author, and Friday's presenter is Julia D. Ferdinando, a comedian and SBHS alumni. We had a bit of a scheduling change from last year to this year, so unfortunately the board wasn't able to be fit into the schedule, but we hope that for next year we'll reach out sooner and hope that we'll be able to work you guys in. The SBHS band students will be leaving for Croatia on Monday and will be gone for a week and a half. The Freshman Community Service Day will be May 1st. The South Burlington School District Fine Arts Night was supposed to be yesterday but was canceled due to the water main break that Mr. Young had mentioned. There will, since Arnell's not here, I feel like I should say there will be a late start day, May 3rd, and spring break is April 22nd through 26th. As you walked in, I'm sure you saw that there were people in the cafeteria. That is because tonight is the 5th grade parent orientation night. At Chamberlain, the kindergarten registration was Monday and Tuesday this week. I'm not sure if that was throughout for all 3 elementary schools. I bet it was. And the Orchard School tag sale is May 3rd and 4th.
Good question. Has the art show been rescheduled or?
Not that I've heard of. I don't know. Delana, did you know anything about that today? No. We'll let you know, though, when it is. Again, that was one of the casualties of yesterday, as Cole said. And kindergarten screening had a little bit of a hiccup there, too, because they had that going on. Kindergarten registration, I should say. So that had a little bit of a hiccup at some of the buildings as well. I don't know how far they got with that and how they handled that yet, but we'll have to make sure that they get rescheduled for anyone who couldn't do that.
Okay. Couldn't have foreseen that one.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll move on to the agenda item 6, city and school collaboration.
So I think the biggest report here, Elizabeth, is we have a upcoming steering committee meeting on April 22nd that will be at the city. Again, school board and the city council will come together in what we call the steering committee, and we'll be talking about communications, 180 Market Street, and kind of talking about a schedule for ongoing meetings. I think safe to say that one of the conversations is that 180 Market Street, the Rick Marcotte School and the city property or the MOU and where we're at with that. So I think that will be, if people are interested, that will be an important meeting for
So
people
that's
to be at.
scheduled for 6:30 over at City Hall, correct? Okay.
Mhm. I know that the agenda has been established.
Mhm.
I think Kevin's going to get the posting out, sometime tomorrow, and we'll make sure that happens.
Does that have to be mutually warned, or is one?
Yeah, we
warned?
kind of do it that way, Delana's, for transparency purposes, we typically do. I don't think we need to if they have it warned as the steering committee, but I don't know, we've done it both ways, right, Delana?
I'll send it to our distributions and the board, and the administrators, but they post it, so they'll take care of that portion.
Good. All right,
Thanks.
we'll move on to master planning and visioning.
So, everything kind of blurs together, but what was the date? Help me
April
out.
11th, Thursday.
Yeah. So we had, we provided another update to the community around the master planning and visioning with feedback from, obviously, Dor Whittier on the options, Bridget, nice job, Mike Martin, Patrick, provided some oversight and gave some perspective on educational opportunities. We're currently really back, I think, we have a working session coming up next week, tomorrow. Yep, that's right. So that is Thursday. You can tell I'm a little bit off in my dates.
10:30, I need to double check.
10:30, you're correct, 10:30. And working meeting, we'll be talking about next steps. Obviously, board will play an important role in determining kind of where you want to go from here. You'll get a chance to get the feedback, the working group will, and then it will come to the whole board, all of the feedback that was gathered for all of the meetings to look at what that brought back.
I know there's not a whole lot of notice before tomorrow. I've been kind of doing a brainstorm ahead of that meeting about what an information packet would look like for the full board, and what pieces of information would be useful to have in that as we start to move toward some kind of decision about next steps. So if there's any thought about something in particular that you would like to see in that packet, this isn't our last chance. Obviously, the working group will continue to work on that over the next few weeks, but that's probably something that will be a centerpiece of what we talk about tomorrow.
We did also, which I need to get you, I know it came in I'm really bad on the dates, obviously, but I know Jerry McGibbon gave us the updated
Yes. No,
data. Did I send that to you?
I think that was on Thursday morning, I want to say, or Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very
So
recent, yeah.
we'll have hard copies too. That's again, kind of reaffirming our enrollment projections based on some of that other data. I haven't had a chance to thoroughly read that again, but that will be an important piece of the packet, I'm quite certain.
And I did get two comments in different forms both from the meeting on the 11th and then subsequent to that as to maybe this really could come after the board makes a recommendation, but it might be worth thinking about ahead of time. But one would be even just video clips of sort of where the pinch points are with our current space, and then some videos of how other schools might be utilizing space to accomplish some flexibility in their programming. So a little bit of compare and contrast, but that was a nice segue into another community comment that I received, which is possibly after the board makes a specific recommendation, that there be set of tours offered of the facilities, and consistent with the prior thing, there might be limited attendance at those, so maybe video those and provide those in a virtual way for folks that otherwise can't be in attendance.
Well, one question I had to raise that, I know some of us have been through the high school and middle school extensively, but I don't know if anybody on the board needs a tour, particularly of the high school, before we make any kind of decision. Because it was really helpful for me, I have to admit, with littler kids. I had been to different parts of the building, but I had never had a full tour before I really got involved in this process, and it was extremely helpful for me to have the narrative. And it was, the tour that I was on was led by students with a little bit of input from some of the adults in the building, but sort of talked about what their day was like and how the building worked for them or didn't work. So.
Well, I know I'd be open for that, and yeah,
So,
I'd be happy to take
right.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Very
And
cool.
maybe that may be something where, if there's sort of a tour capacity, we might want to expand that to some other folks that we would like to include and get
Awesome.
input prior to even making a decision.
Okay, we'll raise it tomorrow with the working group and see what they think.
you sure it's not next week? I'm teasing.
You're gonna
Just
confuse
trying
me
to
and I'm not gonna
elongate your-
show
no,
up
no,
tomorrow.
It's definitely tomorrow. It's definitely 10:30. I got it.
So just a couple of other comments from last week. First of all, we have to think of how to reach out to the community. I know that's obvious, but that wasn't that big of a showing. So where's the video? I mean, we recorded it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where is the recording
RETN.
residing?
And I haven't seen, I don't know if it's up live now or not.
I'm just
but-
wondering if I don't recall in looking at RETN if it tracks the number of views. I know that like YouTube does.
Mhm.
Because that would be helpful to understand if anybody's watching it.
Like, sometimes we live feed here. That's one way, we get a
Well,
count.
we
I don't
can we get
know
a count
about,
of how many people are watching it then?
yeah, so we are aware of the live feed when that happens. That did not happen that night. RETN, I don't know if they have a ticker on how many people tick on the webs, on that particular video and watch it, but we can
Right.
ask. I think the other part is important. Your message here is that people can go on to that. I'm sure if it's not available now, it will be very soon. And they post all of our board meetings up pretty quickly.
I think they get posted on YouTube as well.
Yep.
So
Is it already? See? Awesome, yeah.
if there's some way to track the number of views, I think that's important. But, yeah, the community outreach, I think, we need to do a little bit more
So is that
of
one we can put a link on the Facebook page too?
Yeah,
we-
certainly we can link to the
Yep.
district website, which would then have the link to the video, but we should be able to put the link directly to the video, I would
Yeah.
think, on the Facebook page too. Yep.
Right.
Good.
Folks, what do you think about having one of us or perhaps an administrator post a link on the community watch site? Because I know that one gets a lot of traffic. Bad idea?
It's not a terrible idea. The struggle is then, once we start doing that directly on one of those sites, then a lot of the other community sites expect that we're using them or reaching out, because there's just so much, I don't know how to put it, just talk amongst those different groups that are on the different sites. And so we've struggled with how much to engage directly. Usually what happens is if we put something up on the board Facebook page, there are people who sort of attend those other Facebook sites who have liked our page, and they see it when it goes up on the board
Yeah.
Facebook page, and then they can link directly to the district website. We've tried to just drive traffic directly to the district website as much as we can without really starting to get into commenting or dropping things on different sites, because then we set an expectation that we're going to use those other sites as communication tools, and then when we don't, we kind of get negative feedback
Yeah.
about having not done it. So, yeah.
Although, having said that, because, I mean, I think the real issue with that, Alex, is our policy on kind of social media.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if we shouldn't consider posting that same hyperlink on the Front Porch Forum page, because that would be more informational, and that,
Yeah.
yeah, that,
Yeah, and that also reaches a different audience than necessarily
Yeah.
our parents and all that. Well, and then as we say parents, again, we're sort of talking through the communication strategy right here, where, you know, we could certainly talk about it tomorrow during working group too. But the question is whether we reach out to parents again, and at what point the next right time is to do that.
And before you post it, the link to whichever way we're counting the views. I mean, if we
Yeah.
want to post to the YouTube link, use that if we can't otherwise be counting how many views there are. The other question, several people, and I know there's complications with this, but more than one person was asking about tax implications. And I know that's really difficult at this stage to figure out, but even some ballpark, and if that's something that could be taken up with the group, including Gary, just, it doesn't have to be pricing out what they have, but what does a $50 million bond look like? What does a $100 million bond look like? What does a $150 million bond look like? You know, to give some concept.
Yeah, we.
At least ponder that. Certainly the working group, I'd ask them
Exactly right.
to consider that. And if it's too hard to really do something like that at this stage, well, so be it, but I think
It
we
can
really
certainly
need
be
to-
done. The struggle is making sure that as those numbers get discussed in the community, that the nuance goes with them. That those numbers, we can calculate what debt service would be on a bond of each of those sizes, but what that does to the tax rate is influenced by all the different factors, obviously, that influence how our budget impacts the tax rate in a
Right,
given year.
right,
And it's
sure,
going to change
sure.
from year to year to year, and we're going to have to make sure that whoever's communicating that really understands that we can throw a number out there. The number in terms of tax impact may look quite different, you know, by the time any project actually started to coalesce. And so it's just it's a tricky balance about timing and when we're comfortable enough that we have a sense of what that would look like, so that we're not trying to then back away from something that we've already posted or confuse people with yet another set of numbers. So yes, I hear you. I absolutely hear you. I heard that loud and clear because I got that question about 4 times.
Yeah, maybe it's not tax rate. Maybe it is just what is the
What is the
effect
debt
on the budget?
service?
What is the debt
Yes.
service? Even that.
And the debt service could be a much clearer number, because we
Yeah.
could give a range that says, you know, at this or that interest rate, you know, from the bond bank, you know, this is what debt service would
and
look
use the same
like.
period of time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
The
people-
struggle with that is those numbers are hard to get your brain around as a taxpayer because of their size, without understanding how it impacts you directly.
Right.
Yeah. And the other issue is that, you know, obviously there's direct tax rate impact, and then there is also income sensitized tax, you know, impact and all of that, which is another message that needs to be clear as well as we talk about tax impact.
Right.
Yes, all good feedback.
Yeah.
So we will definitely talk about all those things tomorrow, and I'm sure that our hour and a half long meeting, as usual, will be 2 or 3 hours.
Thank you for attending that, Bridget.
You're not coming tomorrow?
No, I'm otherwise taken up, sorry.
Any other
I'll
comments?
tell you in the morning, and I'll be a little bit late for our meeting that I didn't quite indicate I knew about, but.
Any other comments on master planning and visioning?
I think only one quickie, that if we're trying to get clicks or views or whatever, we can point out that this time the costs are going to be attached to all these different options. I think that might get people to tune in a little bit more.
that the
Well, then you
actual
gotta
prices.
qualify relative costs
Yes,
or
that's
comparative,
true.
yeah.
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 I feel that that's probably gonna be getting out there into the
You
community.
think that's getting traction?
I would
It's out
imagine.
there. I mean, there's definitely been some discussion on Community Watch and some other Facebook pages about, you know, the usual, what we expected, you know, the freak out about how big the numbers are and, you
Yeah, they're
know,
big numbers.
all of that. But it is a way of getting people to start focusing on it and bring them into the discussion and help them understand that there is real issue. Because it's also gotten out there partly because the numbers are out there, it has gotten out there that, you know, a lot of people are out there talking about how, wow, they didn't realize what an infrastructure problem there really is, despite the fact that we've been doing
Even in
diligent
well-maintained
maintenance,
schools, yeah.
that there is really an infrastructure problem that I think a lot of community members just weren't aware of. So, yeah. All right.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 8, consider the school district calendar.
I'm gonna have Mike actually come on up. Everybody, I think, knows Mike Martin, our Director of Learning.
Mhm.
So Mike, thanks for
Hey,
being
Mike.
here.
My pleasure.
Did you want to bring something up on the,
Just wanted to,
Yeah.
help, slide it.
go ahead, so while Mike is doing that,
We shift over
we're
here.
here to talk about calendar. Mike's also gonna be, we'll segue in after to curriculum development and review. And so the calendar, again, not all board members were necessarily aware of this, but last year when we brought the calendar, the year before that actually, there was an agreement by the board. Recognize not all of you were here, that we would stay pretty close to honoring our late starts and early dismissals up through 2020. For the purposes of really making sure that professional development could be, you know, a major focus of our work to allow us to move forward. So what we wanted to do is, we've got a draft calendar that we actually have on here for action tonight, because we need to get it out to the community. That doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to make a decision. We hope you will. But we wanted to give you a little bit about what our current calendar is, and what we've been able to do, and what we propose to do with this calendar. So anyway, without further ado, I'll let Mike kick it off. You okay?
Sure, yeah, my
Is it not?
clicker isn't gonna cooperate.
Do you want me to move it?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super, thanks. Great. So Superintendent Dave Young asked me to just prepare sort of a brief overview of some of the great professional learning that's taken place during TLC time, these teacher learning communities that the board is invested in. And the board will recall that, based on the information that I have, that you extended the late starts by an hour, so that went into effect this year. And I'd just start by saying that extension has allowed teachers to have some work time, structured work time, to actually apply some of the learning. So what I mean by that is, instead of having a PD session that's basically like all presentational, and then we cross our fingers and hope the teachers will apply it, there's been built-in collaboration time, so there's some learning by doing built into the actual work. So this, next slide please. This overview, if you try the right arrow. Oh, that's the problem. There, oh, okay, good. Yeah, I think it went like 4 or 5. There we go. So this is slide 2.
Before you go on, I just
Yep.
want one correction.
Yep.
Late starts, high middle, we're 2 hours, right?
Right.
So we typically start at 8:40. We have students coming in now at 10:40 on those days.
Right. And David, I wonder if no, still doesn't work. Okay. So the first thing to know is that this was all the elementary schools and the high school participated in resiliency training. And this is sometimes referred to as trauma-informed teaching, but this is on the positive side of things. So instead of thinking of a deficit sort of way of thinking about students, these are the skills that will actually build resiliency with students in response to students coming from a trauma background. And you can see some of the areas of focus here: executive functioning, emotional regulation, social competency, and social support. The other part of this series was restorative practice. And so as we're thinking about how we want students to respond to conflict in class, in school, in the wider community, this teaches some of those same skills. You may have heard of restorative practice circles. That's a sort of a support structure that's provided. And so this is really training teachers to incorporate these skills into their everyday practice. All of the elementary schools also did work to incorporate, during TLC time, to incorporate the new national social studies standards. These are referred to as the C3 standards. And the 3 C's are college, career, and civic readiness, ready to be citizens. And one of the shifts, sort of like next generation science curriculum, they have these cross-cutting skills, cross-cutting areas, so it's interdisciplinary within social studies. So the idea is to always be, from kindergarten on, teaching civics, economics, geography, and history. And so you might wonder, well, economics in kindergarten? But, you know, if you have like a grocery store math problem, then you can start there and build out from there. So the idea is that, you know, sometimes we're just teaching history. And so this implies some shifts, and this obviously aims directly at our citizenship end. So we're pleased with that too. This learner engagement, I think, is sort of if we had to characterize the kind of the connecting thread for all of the work happening at Tuttle this year, I would use that term or that label, given the fact they've been working on personalized learning plans, student-led conferences, culturally sustainable pedagogy, so that's a lot of the diversity, equity, inclusion work, and proficiency-based learning. So that's really what's the TLC work has looked like at the middle school. And at both the elementary schools and the high school, a lot of work around universal design for learning. And this is a brain-based framework that has strategies, specific strategies for teachers to provide multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action expression to engage students. Finally, proficiency-based learning is a serious shift. It's, you know, the entire state. This is part of a national movement as well. In other states, it's called competency-based learning or mastery-based learning sometimes. But this is a heavy lift and also implies some significant instructional shifts. So that work is ongoing, and I think at both the high school and the middle school, a lot of the TLC time went into this work. So when we compare those to our end statements, we can see that we're on target, that we're doing the right work to get to these, to meet these ends. And so I just wanted to say, from my vantage point, I can't imagine trying to do my job without this embedded professional development that's provided through the TLC time. So I know there's an expiration date on that investment, but I hope that the board in due time will consider extending that investment. Thanks.
So, shifting into the calendar, Mike's given you a little bit of a backdrop of what occurred this year. Again, what we also heard from folks was on the calendar design of last year, and I didn't give you the last year one, but there were some things that were, you know, back to back, and trying to be a little more mindful about disruption. So, Mike, are you able to just do a little bit of overview on that as well for us around kind of that calendar design and some of the feedback and work we did administratively?
Sure.
To try to recognize and minimize that disruption. And what I mean specifically, the disruption is we had some days for a family who had an elementary and a middle and high or high level, it could be all three, I suppose, could create a significant amount of disruption. And one of the things was, could we minimize that at all in this calendar? So,
right on. So I think when the schools were proposing dates for the TLC time, the TLC work, oftentimes I think the schools were looking through the lens of how many instructional days between each one, and thinking about implementing some of these initiatives. So I think that was the first lens that was held to it. And I think the next lens that we applied was sort of, what's the impact on families? So if I have a student at multiple schools, and these dates are really spread out, I might be looking for childcare, a morning here, an afternoon there. So, so we just did a little additional work this year that went into this proposed calendar, where we really tried to line them up. So if the elementary school had an early dismissal, we tried to make sure that that was on top of a date with a late start at the middle high school, so that to minimize impact on families. So we're pleased with that work.
So, before I let you guys ask questions of us, the other part is that regionally, we have an obligation in the Champlain Valley to adopt common 175 student days. So, again, this is primarily in conjunction with our tech centers, because you can't have such diverse and different schedules. So that's a requirement of the law. So the Champlain Valley superintendents adopted the 175 calendar, and then from that, we individually, depending on the number of days, because some folks have just 175, some have 180 student days like we do, and then in addition, we also obviously have different contracts for teachers. We have 189 days for our teachers. So this calendar reflects the 180 student days and the 189 staff days. So anyway, let me entertain your questions for us.
The one question I always have, because I get a lot of calls from parents usually once the calendar comes out, is the student days. How do we account for, I've got, just if you look at in-service is 9 days, and there's 16 late start days, which are the equivalent of about 5 days, a little bit more than 5 school days. So how, the 170 or the 180 student days, are those, how do you count an in-service day? Is that a full day, or do you sort of prorate that in the calendar?
If it's an in-service day, then that's usually,
It's not,
it's
yeah.
usually a no student day.
Right.
So it counts as a doesn't count as a student day,
Okay,
and it counts as a staff, as a teacher day into
Right.
the 189.
and how about the late starts?
The late starts count as a student day and count as a staff day, both. As long as, again, contractually or by law, as long as the majority of the day that if they're in school and they're served lunch or served them lunch, then it counts as a day.
So here, are we effectively, though, reducing our student days by 5 if we have 16 late start days that are 2 hours each?
Yeah, I think contact time for teachers is definitely reduced. There's no question. Contact time for students with staff, teachers, and instruction is definitely reduced. What we do, I know at both the high school and the middle schools, we don't, the students won't, they won't be absent the class, they get shortened up. And Cole, I think can you explain that a little bit on a late start day? You still have all of the same classes, they're just shorter periods, is that correct?
Right. And everyone still has lunches, and they do their best to make that at the same time. It's a normal school day, just the classes are about 20 minutes shorter.
So your answer is yes, it's less instruction time, it still counts as a student day.
Honestly, that's sort of at the crux of what I hear from parents, is
Yep.
really just less school time. Effectively, it's a week of whatever you want to characterize that learning as.
Yeah, I
Agreed.
hear that. And the other thing I hear is, especially from elementary parents who are really at the forefront of needing childcare when school is not in session, is that there are very few full weeks, and they're scattered about. The half days are scattered about, and it's hard for families, especially with 2 working parents, to try to figure out childcare so frequently, but not necessarily on a consistent basis. I will say I don't have the other calendar to compare it with. It feels like, looking at this calendar, it's a little more consistent, that it looks like, from an elementary perspective, it looks like it's the second or third Friday, pretty much, of every month. There is an early release day, which feels a little bit more consistent. That one in March where we have the in-service day, right after break. It feels like it's a week later, but I could be mistaken, which is a little easier if you've just had a 10-day break, not to have the following week then be a 4-day week. So some of the things that, I've brought up in the past seem to somewhat have been resolved. I don't have the other calendar for comparison next to this one, but yeah, I just wonder if there is, anything we can, I'm always like on the lookout for things that we can do for parents to kind of ease those days. I understand that we need them, and I understand that we're doing good work on them. I've heard that not just from Mike tonight, but in sidebar comments and in other places where I've been, on hiring committees or other things. Teachers have, mostly administrators have wanted to impress upon me how much work has gotten done during those days, and I understand that we are using them effectively. But I'm always just on the lookout for where we can try to make things a little smoother for families during the school year, especially families that don't have things set up. Because the response in the past has always been, well, kids can go to schools out on those days that are early release days, but that's not always the case if there's not a space for them and they're not a regular schools out child. And Lee has been extremely accommodating where he can be for families that need those extra days here and there, and he's worked hard to expand that program so there's capacity when it's needed. So I feel like things have gotten a little bit better, but there still is definitely a concern in the community about that.
We,
My very question was about schools out. So, I mean, obviously, it would be huge. There's no way that Lee could cover that kind of need, even knowing ahead of time these are the early release days? Because we're not really talking about late starts. The students are old enough. So.
Well, it's tricky because you have to have a certain amount of staff per student ratio, for that program, and he does a pretty good job of keeping it staffed well enough that there can be a little bit of flexibility. But it's also a challenge because then you're asking parents to pay. It's not a free program, so you're asking parents to pay for their kids to be there that afternoon as well.
it's a licensing requirement
Yeah.
and staffing, one. So we got capacity based on licensing, and then it's a fee, right? So again, it's all those things that add in, and actually fourth is transportation. So, mom, dad, guardian have to figure out how to come and get them at the end of the day. So, I mean, I'm wanting to express how important these days are, but on the same side, we recognize the sacrifice that folks are, parents and guardians are making for all the childcare and the resources needed.
Any other questions or comments? All right, are you looking for action, David, on the
Yes, I am.
calendar? So I will take a motion to approve the district calendar for 2019-2020 as presented.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
So Mike, you're on again. So we're on to, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Alex.
We have negotiations update, item number 10 that comes after. I think it might be a little shorter, and I don't know if there's anybody in the audience that is waiting for that particular moment, but if so, perhaps we could move to do number 10 first. What do you think about that, Mr. Everett? Okay, are you waiting for? I'm not waiting. Not waiting for anything in particular? Just going to stay the whole thing? Okay, never mind, let's go. Thank you.
Okay, agenda item 9, executive limitation policy monitoring, and this is warned for action.
Yes, so this is 2.10, curriculum development and review. It is in your packet, and I'm going to let Mike also walk you through it a little bit, Mike, if that's okay. And
So is this totally redone, or largely?
yes,
I
the answer to that is absolutely yes.
Yeah.
I think
and
it reflects
Yeah.
new thinking and new collaboration with myself and Mike, mostly Mike and his expertise in this particular area.
Yeah, I thought it was very good. I thought it was definitely an improvement from what we've seen on this one in the past. But, go ahead.
Just to
Yeah, Mike.
clarify then, if this is the first time it's coming to the board, do we expect action?
I think that's probably a little lofty on our part, but we warned it for action, but I think, I'm also trying to be mindful of the things that are in the background, but this is an important one, so.
Okay.
Yeah, your pleasure.
Super. So I might start by kind of just speaking to what Martin was mentioning. I think the biggest change in format this year is that it just made sense to me to try to use our ends to structure this. So instead of sort of a topical arrangement going from one aspect to the next of various initiatives or various elements of our curriculum, I just used as section headers, if you will, our ends, and just sort of thought, okay, what evidence do we have of solid curriculum and curriculum improvements that are aimed at meeting these ends? And then also, I think that this is new, and if this is not appropriate for this report, I'd be glad to change this, but I just, in the spirit of continuous improvement, ended each section by saying, and I think the next thing that we need to work on is this. So the only other thing that I would add before kind of turning it over for questions is that I also referenced throughout the text the education quality standards, the Vermont education quality standards, which I use sort of as a definition touchstone to come back and say, okay, when we say curriculum, these are the things that are required by Vermont statute. And then I was able to draw on two significant reports that took place this year. The NEASC self-study. The final report, there's a draft that's out, but I don't believe it's been finalized yet. So I drew on the self-study that the high school actually completed in the fall that led to the NEASC visit. So that really helped for the high school. And then in February, we had an integrated field review conducted by the agency. And so it's a day-long visit, but ahead of the visit, there's a document review that takes place. And then the visit is really structured by observations throughout and then interviews that are set up in advance. And so that's probably a broader overview, but you have the principle. That one is structured by the main elements of the educational quality standards. So you'll recognize academic proficiency, safe, healthy schools, personalization, and financial priorities. High quality staffing is the other one. So those five sort of major dimensions of the education quality standards. And so this is a preliminary report, but in each of those areas there are commendations and recommendations. And so I drew on those for the curriculum review that I'm submitting to the board tonight. But I thought you'd find it handy to have the full report as well. And it's not nearly as long as the NEASC one. It's maybe a little easier to get through. And again, NEASC is just for the high school, whereas the integrated field review is the whole district. So there were documents and site visit for each of our 5 schools.
I think it's reflective of the work that Mike just shared on the calendar too, with a lot of the profession development. There's a lot of connections and ties to the content that he spoke about earlier. Obviously, this is the main work of our district, and I think much more accurately reflects for you where we are and where we're going. I think it's safe to say that we know we have a lot more to provide. We have a lot more evidence, I think, and data that we'll be able to provide in the near future. But that's been kind of our ongoing struggle with data that we can collect from the state, data that stays the same, that tracks cohorts, et cetera. But we're hoping that will be another add to this.
Comments, questions?
I guess I don't understand. One of the recommendations in the integrated field review report is that the district should consider a more systematized approach to data. What does that mean? Yeah,
Sure. So I think that looking ahead, this is something that David and I have been talking a lot about. When we think of academic proficiency, we tend to look at standardized test scores, so our Smarter Balance scores. And that's good, and that's useful. And that's also, that's just ELA and math. So when we think about the entire curriculum, we really need to be thinking about what are the data systems that we could have in place that would measure, for example, the transferable skills at the high school, our local language for transferable skills are the student learning expectations, or SLEs. And they're the same as the transferable skills on the wall right over here, posted in the library. So where some of our proficiency-based learning work is getting in place assessment and reporting systems so that we can not just say, okay, ELA math, in May, the Smarter Balanced results showed this for our students, but actually track our students' growth in the transferable skills. And these are skills that, our employers and higher education are clamoring for. They're saying, please send us informed, integrative thinkers. Please send us good citizens. Please send us great problem solvers and great communicators. So that would be one sort of major new foray into kind of improving our data systems, would be to track transferable skills. I think we're also interested in data, for example, when we have reports on co-curricular participation, is there a correlation between that and academic attainment? Mm-hmm. So that is something that some higher ed institutions do, and they've found a correlation, by the way, between co-curricular. So the board currently, in the annual report of the community, when we see participation, we see a number next to each club or activity. Some of those numbers are the same people. Actually, many of them are. And so it would be great to have data that's looking at, okay, how many of our students are participating in co-curriculars? And then how many co-curriculars are they participating in, instead of just having sort of club enrollment numbers. So look, that's two kind of important examples when we're talking about improved data systems, when we're thinking about our students, not just their academic proficiency, but across the curriculum, when we think about disposition for lifelong learning, citizenship. Another big one, I could go on and on, so I'll try not to, but another big one would be to track flexible pathways. So as you know, Vermont has, adopted Act 77, this law that really encourages public schools to help students pursue opportunities in dual enrollment, in internships, in service-based learning, work-based learning. And we're not really we have anecdotal data and qualitative data, but we don't have data systems in place to really track that yet. So those are sort of three big areas that David and I think would be great to start doing a much better job of collecting data on.
Well, and the qualitative question takes me back to your first example of not just measuring, say, English and math, but measuring, we care about student ends. How are they doing? How are they prepared for life?
Right.
But aren't you then talking about qualitative measures and and does a teacher write that up? I mean, what does that look like?
Right. So yes and no. So when we're talking about tracking transferable skills, we could look at qualitative data, like the quality of various products that come from those learning experiences. But we're also currently working hard to get in place a system where students on their report cards, there will be a grade, an assessment in their growth towards a transferable skill. And that'll be quantifiable. So which transferable skills, how many students have met which transferable skills by what grade. So that's really going to be quantitative data. Same for participation in flexible pathways. Instead of look at this cool thing this student did, so anecdotal evidence, which is important.
Yep.
And also important to share back with our students, maybe you want to check this out too. To actually have okay, this number of students we know that this number of students are doing dual enrollment, and this number pursuing, service-based learning, and then also getting in place structures for them to actually record that, garner credit, or some kind of, again, tracking data. So those would be quantitative measures. Finally, there's one more thing. We are currently tentatively planning on administering the Gallup Student Engagement Survey, which is short, takes 20 to 30 minutes to administer, and we'd administer that to grades 6 through 12. There's a national testing window, mid-September to October, and it tests things like social belonging, hope, so aspirational measures. It's norm referenced, And you can see, like, how does your building, how are your students, what are they saying compared to, you know, the other school, compared to district results, and compared to national results. And in my former position in Montpelier, we used that to look at measures of student engagement, which you think of as something super subjective. And we had this quantitative data that was really, really useful to help improve our advisory programs, our personalized learning plans, that sort of thing. So it's hard work. You can tell from the things I'm describing, but we think that that would be really helpful data for us.
Take it. Thanks.
Sure.
Can I ask how far away you think a report that would have something like transferable skills data and where we are in terms of the systems to support something like that? So I know that since I've been on the board, and I've not been on very long, we've had a few different systems that we've tried out that haven't quite worked out in terms of collecting that type of information about proficiencies and transferable skills and that kind of thing. So where do we stand in terms of those systems and potential reporting to the board?
So I think at the high school, we have an ambitious and tentative goal of reporting out on transferable skills, on students meeting them, or being on target to meet them, or exceeding them. They're sort of different. It's a different scale. It's not based on the scale of 100. It's a proficiency scale, as early as next year. And so this year we've done a lot of work transitioning to a new student information system, which is going to also be our reporting system. So there's going to be a lot of work on the back end, building customized reports, and some of that work's underway. But we are planning on that actually happening starting in the fall at the high school, and then a year from this fall at the middle school. So I've been doing some work with some departments, one department at a time at the middle school, working towards that from a curriculum standpoint so that we're ready to report on those transferable skills a year from this fall.
Okay,
So that's sort of our rough timetable.
great, thank you.
Sure.
A couple, I think the report's fine. I didn't have any real comments on that, but the integrated field review report, when there's a final report, it would be great to have that on the agenda and understand your reaction or what the plans are, given the recommendations and such. I think actually spending a little chunk of time with that. It may even fit in, although this may be too much, a lot of it seems to fit in with ends monitoring, not all of it, but when are we supposed to do ends monitoring again anyway? What is that? Seems like it's been a while.
I have my big book with me,
Yeah,
the calendar,
yeah.
but it's on that calendar somewhere.
Yeah,
That's a really good answer, isn't it, Martin? No, not really.
it's on the
I know it's
calendar.
there somewhere.
It's been scheduled
Yeah.
on the big calendar. Okay, well, that's fine. But no, I don't know if we should park this in the future agenda items or just if we can look at this in conjunction, but that might be too much. I'm just thinking
Well,
it might be a separate.
Topic.
I'm just trying to fit it into policy governance as well, and I think
Is that where you go?
it does fit. There's a lot of aspects in this
again,
that
it's
would make sense.
feedback, and Mike and I will talk about how best to do that. Thanks for that feedback.
I had a couple of things. One, the typical methodology to get reports like this would be to highlight what we had previously and then
Right.
what the changes are.
Right.
One, I thought this was really well done, and an improvement. It would have been even more so if you'd reminded me how painful it was to have looked at the past report.
We could have highlighted,
So it could have
We could have
been, even
given
just
you
a couple of reference pages, so.
I'd be
Missed
glad.
opportunity.
Yeah, well, okay.
The other observation I'd make is, and I worry a little bit about this because I've seen it evolve over the years, is one thing I think that helps the board communicate with the community and our stakeholders throughout the community are sort of consistency and standardization of language in some ways. So as I went through some of these reports, and I read as much as I could, and I'm seeing it here. We've got some language here around transferable skills. We had some language in the NEASC report around core values. So that there's a lot of the national qualities or the education quality standards has some language, and I do worry a little bit that we're missing opportunities to sort of have a common South Burlington language across facilities, within the curriculum, whatever form it may take. So just whatever that observation is worth, it would be helpful as an individual, as a board member, and with the communication with the community to have some common language that we think is sustainable over a long period of time, however it results, because that will be helpful. And then the last thing is, I don't know the frequency of these of this evidence here, but obviously we review these on an annual basis, so it would be helpful to understand the level of frequency with which we'd see this kind of evidence, and is there supporting evidence that could sort of stand in as a proxy on a more routine basis. So the frequency and the nature of these types of evidence.
Yeah, so the frequency of NEASC, the frequency of IFR
Yeah.
connected to our
I assume
report.
this is an annual, or,
No,
yeah.
it's every 10 years.
You're right to bring that up because it was sort of
Every 10
a
years.
good year for
Yeah.
reports.
Right.
So
Isn't the integrated field report, that came from the EQS and it's
Integrated.
been like 5 or 6 years since they set forth that they were
That
gonna be doing
objective.
these.
That's right.
right.
So,
I think this is year 3, and they've just gotten to this.
is it year 3?
This
Okay.
region, yeah.
But
No,
NEASC
it seems
is
like
when-
6.
Although we delayed, it's every 10 years, isn't that right? We did it 10 years ago?
Right. So the full report, I thought that was a 7-year cycle, but I could be wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably.
But, the point being, you're right, it was a good year for evidence on this particular policy. What would stand in as a proxy on a going forward basis that, have some
So-
supporting
To
information?
my thinking, it would be a lot of the things that we were just talking about with Brian. Some of these new data systems. So still with our Smarter Balance scores, we'll continue to use that as an important measure, as an important benchmark. But definitely the hope with proficiency-based learning is to have some of this common language. And for now, really, when we're thinking about transferable skills, we're really emphasizing those 6-12. Down the road, it would be great to build that down further. I think in the elementary schools, there's such a push to get to numeracy and literacy that since NCLB, there's been a narrowing of the curriculum. And so it's probably time to go back to some of those other skills. But I think that's what we would see in the coming years, is building those transferable skills so that, I like to pick on informed integrative thinker because I don't think we'd, ask a second grader, hey, are you an informed integrative thinker? But I could see in the future K-5 PLPs that start collecting the awesome work that our students are doing, where our youngest students are saying, who am I as a citizen? Who am I as a communicator? Who am I as a thinker? And so that's sort of where I hope the work goes.
So in this, it has recommendations at the end of each one, and how much weight or urgency is going to be put into them? And in particular, I'm interested in the one on the end of page 9 regarding mental health or mental support for teachers. And given some of the things this district's been through in the past 2 years,
Exactly.
I'm getting more and more aware about it. So what kind of action will this lead to?
So I think the first step is, this is really hot off the press.
Yeah.
So, the visit was in February. The report came to us towards the end of March, maybe the 3rd week of March. So this is new. So I think our first step, so we haven't even properly debriefed this as a leadership team.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be step 1, is a first reading as a leadership team, and taking stock of what is validating our current work and where we need to grow. And I know that we typically have a retreat day in June and I would expect that we would be using this to look at our continuous improvement plan and say, okay, what are we missing? What are we doing well? What maybe can we say, okay, we're doing a good enough job and we can park that for now and reallocate resources elsewhere. And then I know that we've also got a day in August at the Vermont Principals Academy, sort of big statewide conference, where our leadership team has a tradition of spending a full day together and doing a retreat there. So I think those are the next places to say, okay, what do we see here? And then where it would go is in our continuous improvement plan and thinking about, okay, what are the what professional development are we missing? What staffing are we missing? And so then that would inform, the budget process in October, and then looking ahead to, like I said, this isn't a report that happens every year. So this would go into our thinking for the following year's consolidated federal program, which I oversee. And so how are we using our Title I money? How are we using our Title II money based on these?
So hearing from that, maybe September is when we plan on having the full review of the report and what you guys are going to do about it, because that's kind of what I was after, is
Super.
understanding, all the response to all the recommendations and kind of really dive into the report a little bit more.
Great.
Because it sounds like there's those two things that you have.
I think it's good feedback, and,
Coming up.
Mike did a nice job hitting on all of them, but it should be, this is a important component of assessment. Obviously, we have teaching and learning, we have assessment, we have planning, we have budgeting, and around we go, right? And I think what I know that the community expects is that when we assess, we plan, and we budget, and it's not always that we budget more, but we may reallocate the resources, as Mike said, too. And in some cases, depending on what the data is telling us and where we need to put our emphasis, some of that is right back to what we talked about earlier in professional development, that correlates to that. And in some cases, it's a redistribution of resources. So, anyway. So my suggestion, I think we have a few things here, and we probably should be clear about what that ask is before we leave, but we would bring this back to a next meeting for action. Is that what I'm hearing, or what's the board's pleasure?
I'm ready to vote on it now. I don't need to see it again. I need to see the other two things in depth, but,
Okay.
I think you've got an opportunity to get this act.
Okay, then be quiet, David. I got it.
I think there were some follow-up
Yeah,
items
I
that,
took some
whether
of
we
them.
put them officially in the parking lot or we just
Mhm.
request through this monitoring policy that we have follow-up.
Great.
It's really that September timeframe.
yeah, but follow up for the actual report itself. I think this looks good.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll do a quick read. 2.10, curriculum development and review. The superintendent shall not allow the district to be without written curricula aligned with Vermont standards and board's ends policies that are coordinated across all grade levels and schools. Further, the superintendent shall not fail to review the curricula periodically based upon student performance results, learning opportunities data, new research, and updated content knowledge with the goal of all students meeting the board's ends policy. Can we, before I take a vote on that, we have made this correction across several areas, but it's the district's ends policies versus the board? Just an unupdated version. Reasonable interpretation?
Yes.
Adequate data?
Yes.
In compliance?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Mike.
And I would also suggest, this is going to be online, the report. Is it attached to the meeting minutes or something like that? The only reason I say it is people who are watching this, I think it'd be very valuable if folks take a look at this report. So, if it,
I didn't put the attachments, but I will.
yeah, I don't think the attachments, but the report itself, well, and if you want to put the attachments, that's up to you.
Great, thank you, board. Thank you, Mike.
2.4?
So, we're gonna shift Amity. Everybody knows Amity Denton.
Did we actually get a 2.4? Did I somehow miss actually seeing the 2.4?
It's in there.
Is it?
So 2.4, under the mentorship of John Stewart. He told me 2.4 doesn't come back as it was initially presented. This is like an addendum or something he had worked out as, it's an add-on to just sort of wrap up the 2.4 that was presented to you, because I gave you all the data in the 2.4. It just was unaudited at that time. So he just said, remind the board, we did this discussion. I'm like, okay, John.
How many months ago was it? Yeah.
The, yeah, 2.4 was done in,
October, November.
yeah,
sometime in
November,
that
I
timeframe,
think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we probably ought to. Just a quick comment, we ought to memorialize that if our audit report and review is gonna lag that review of 2.4.
Note
or
it
we
at the
could
time when we
revisit.
do it, or move it.
Just if this is always gonna be a lag and we can't address that in future calendar issues, just make a note when we're reviewing this,
Yeah.
it's a supplement to 2.4.
Yep. One of the things we need to talk more about in the calendar
Mhm.
is where we place those items in the calendar
Right.
based on the actions and things that are upcoming, right? So if we're planning budgeting, which we start in November, what will help inform us? So it may be that we need to have the auditing and budgeting done towards the end of the school year that will help inform it. You know, or again, I'm not giving great example here, but there's things that sequence through the year that will be helpful to inform our decision or your decisions. And, I think we've done a really good job, but it's still asking more of the deeper questions. You can't have everything when you want it. You can't do everything right before because it's spread out over a 12-month period. So we're mindful of that.
Yeah, and the audit didn't get finalized until the very end of March this year, which is later than it has been in the past. We had our field work done in the tail end of October, so it was quite a long time. I was a little upset with the auditors about that lag.
Was there a
and
particular reason that they gave?
They didn't really give us a good reason. They are moving to new software that is all paperless, and so they have a whole new sort of financial thing they're working towards, so I think that had a lot to do with it, but I'm not sure if that was 100% the reason. I think honestly that they ended up taking a lot of extra clients because the David Angelano and company stopped auditing school districts in Vermont completely, unexpectedly, so I think R.H.R. Smith took on a lot of the clients, and I'm not sure that they have a lot of field work folks, but it's after the field work that takes a lot of work in their office, and I think they just hadn't ramped up enough to take on that bulk of work. I've been told they have since, but there's a lag, so we're going to make sure we don't have that lag next year. And I believe that next year is the last year of their bid year anyhow, so we'll see what happens going forward after that.
Is there in their contract with us, is there a timing?
I honestly can't answer that question because I don't know the contract well enough off my head. Okay, so I thought we'd just start with the audit report review, and it references the audit itself, which I think you all got a copy of, maybe. I don't know if it was sent in your packet. It's thick, so there was a lot of stuff in the packet this time. So again, this was a supplement to the monitoring 2.4, that it's now a final audit. And so I just did some highlights of some of the important pieces of this audit, starting with pages 1 through 3 of the audit reference the auditor's opinion of the financial statements, and it just was an unqualified or clean opinion. On pages 4 through 11 is our management discussion and analysis. So it kind of overviews what's happening in the district and economic factors around our areas and what affects our finances. So just some of the highlights that I put in, talk about on pages 11 and 12, the audit. The funding status of our defined benefit plan, which is our support staff retirement plan, is now at 82% funded, which is quite healthy considering what we were at several years ago. We were just barely over the 50% funded mark. So having combined our pool of money with the city to get a larger pool and investing with SEI Trust, we've grown significantly over the last several years. So it's we've grown with a increase of our position of $923,000. That's actually outlined on page 24 and 25. So the passage of the Act 166 pre-K program has brought increased awarenesses to families in the community, and they've taken advantage of our pre-K program. So we have seen an increase in the expenses to the pre-K program. So that was just something that we noticed, an increase in the FY18 fiscal year over the 17. Actually, that's actually just notes in the MD&A. There's no specific reference to a number. We're just trying to highlight some of the economic factors, so. And the administration worked closely with you guys at the school board level to keep our tax rates low and keeping a modest budget increase in 2018. I have to remember what fiscal year we're talking about again. That was less than 1% as a total expense increase. And that, combined with the change in the yield at the end of the legislative session, actually kept our final tax rate down quite significantly as well over what was presented to our budget, to our electorate. The passage of Act 85 Healthcare Recapture significantly reduced our fund balance, as we spoke about a lot during our budget process. That total was, over a 2-year period, will be $304,000, which does draw down significantly the fund balance that we have and had, which is then shown on the next page, pages 17 and 19 in the audit. 17 through 19 actually outline our fund balances, but I put it together a little schedule here showing the general fund. We started with a fund balance of $1,065,000. We had a decrease in that of $387,000, leaving us an ending fund balance of $78,000. So of this total, $678,000, the unassigned fund balance was $65,456. The non-spendable portion of the general fund balance was $58,028. And the amount committed for the FY19 budget, which we're in currently, was $555,345. So for the FY20 budget, the amount that we committed as revenue was an estimate of $169,000, which was given to us at the end of the audit field work in October. And when we got the audit report in March, there had been some other entries that had been done post-audit field work that showed our unassigned fund balance being only $65,456. So that's not great news. We don't like to see that we overestimated our carry forward into the next fiscal year. But that's what happens when you get estimates and then there's other final adjustments that take place after the fact. So our capital project fund balance is actually in a negative of $192,563. I apologize, there was a typo from the number up above. That was a reduction of $267,000, and that this balance is reflective of the closeout in fiscal year 17 for the 2014 repurpose bond that moved over a couple of years. And so the activity also in the 2016 bond is reflected in this as well, but that one is not completely finalized at this point. So the overage comes mainly from a couple of projects that were in the scope of that 2014 bond. The first being the middle school elevator project came in. There was some unexpected costs that came due to insulation needed in the roof because of the cold weather. The elevator was inoperable. So they had to do that in the surrounding walls because it would make it, when it was cold, be unable to move. The oil froze in the mechanical pieces of it. Way beyond my purview. And then the state of Vermont required that we add an additional mechanical closet specific to the elevator panel. So the architectural fees had exceeded what was expected due to that, that project change. And then the second project that ended over budget was the high school windows. The first phase of the high school windows, they found PCBs in the caulking around the windows. So that actually was a significant cost to do the remediation work on those windows. And then the final fund balance that we speak of, the other governmental funds, are our special revenue funds from the grants. And that ended with a positive balance of $654,878, with unassigned of 10,524, and then restricted, committed, and assigned funds balance out at 665,000. So it's really easier to look at the actual audit report to see these numbers. I just kind of did the overview in writing, but on pages 17, it shows all those numbers. And the next section refers to the fund balances of our enterprise funds, which are our nutritional services, our Schools Out program, and Munson Fields, and then we have one little tiny fund that we've been carrying for years. And so it shows the nutritional services fund balance started out with a deficit of 183. We know we've been working on a deficit of food service for a number of years that has been going down, although in 18 there was a very slight loss of $2,311. The Schools Out program had started the year with a positive fund balance of 373. They had a slight decrease in their fund balance. I think mostly that was the start of the pre-K program that took place this 2018, so they should see a lot different numbers coming this season, this fiscal year. And the Munson Field, it had very little activity, but we're starting to gain probably more usage now. The field's project slowed down the rentals while we were going through the upgrades, so we're slowly starting to ramp up the facility use on that project. So that ended with a positive fund balance. And then the other funds. Yeah.
It's really the addition of the K program, right, for Schools Out. We added a K program in Schools Out.
I thought it was the pre-K, or
No,
did that start this year?
No, I think it's the K program we started for Schools Out, because we were typically only serving kind of our 1 through
Okay,
5
I'm sorry.
population, so.
I was
just a
thinking there was a
correction.
pre-K start in
No,
FY.
because they're not a pre-K provider.
Oh.
They're
K.
providing K
Okay.
after-school programming.
Oh, okay, sorry,
No problem.
my misunderstanding. Thank you for the clarity. Okay, and so the next section is just looking at our debt summary on page 41 of the audit. It shows our long-term debt, which consists of bonds, leases, our payroll and benefit accrued absences, and our net pension liability. So in total, the liabilities decreased $767,872 to a total of $6.9 million. The bonds were decreased by $265,000, which was the final payment on the 2007 bond, I believe was the year of that. The leases were down $768,000, just paying off leases on the one-to-one programs over the years and other equipment. And then the compensated absences was up just a tiny bit. And then our net pension liability was down by a net of $97,500. And on page 49 of the audit, I just wanted to highlight, because I know it's been a large question in the community over the last several years about the state teachers' retirement defined pension information. And the actuarial report that is a required disclosure in our audit every year, but bringing to light the fact that if the state asked us to start funding our portion of that unfunded liability, it would be a $47.5 million liability on our district. You know, it's $1 billion liability being carried right now. Our portion of that would be $47.5 million. And then on page 112, we just show how much federal grant funds we brought into the district last year of 112, right near the end. That shows the federal awards that we brought in of 1.5 million, which was up just over 100,000 from from 2017. And then on page 119, which is the very last page, is just the auditor's result of the internal controls and if there were any questioned costs or findings, and there were none. So that was a really down and dirty, quick review, sorry. There's always a lot of information in this audit book, you know, that makes you.
So we always get, it doesn't affect the management letter, but we seem to have gotten consistently some feedback, and I put it on the page, but on the nutritional
Yes.
program deficit. what were the three items? The,
Management letter, the three items that they highlighted were purchase orders, the school lunch deficit, and the student activity accounts.
account, right.
Yes.
So, can you kind of just give updates on those? And then, I guess I'm curious as to, because those have been some pretty consistent observations for at least 3 or 4 audits that I'm aware of, maybe more, when does it turn into a not clean management letter?
I think it would turn into a not clean management letter if we weren't seeing positive changes every year in those items. So every year, you know, in a company that's got a $49 million expense budget, you're going to have findings. And we have worked really hard to try to keep those very minimal. And we've put into place some procedures for the student activity accounts. There's some vouchers that we've created. We have a whole process that people are following for the most part all the time. I think there were literally 2 things that they found. So, I mean, they have to give us something to work with, but we were feeling very positive that it was minimal. The nutritional services deficit, we've discussed, I think this has been a very long number of years. The one positive that we see is that's going down. This year was a little tiny increase in that deficit, but in typical, you know, we've been dropping that deficit significantly from when it was really highlighted back when Bill, or perhaps Ron Smith, I think, talked to you folks about that. You know, the reality is the auditors feel that the money is owed to that fund. We've paid, you know, so it would be used, but we don't have fund balance to really utilize that. So we're doing our part by trying to transfer, or do we have in the budget been transferring 50,000 each fiscal year to help offset those deficits. So they see that, we are working toward that. They just always would recommend that you wipe it to a 0 balance.
So we did have 50,000 in the budget again this year?
Yes, we did.
So really, the deficit was $52,000. I mean,
Right, because we transferred that.
because we transferred
Yes.
50,000, so
Yeah.
it's a little more serious than.
Yes, true. Costs of the benefits is tough on that program. You know, the salaries and benefits, they go up each year, and, you know, the cost of food has been going up too. So, yeah, it's a tough balance for them to get that break-even point without getting the supplement from the district,
But I thought
or the
that the
general
new
fund.
rules from the Department of Agriculture allow us to use cheap, bad food. Cheap,
Well, I think she
unnutritious
tries
food.
not to do that, though.
Thank you for that. Thank her for that.
I don't think her goal is to do the cheap and not good nutritional
No, I'm
food,
just
I
saying
know.
we have that option now.
Well, I know, right? And then the purchase order, the issue, and a lot of this is sort of, I don't want to say self-directed, but we in the business office have always requested the special ed department do purchase orders for their services. And those services are done before the purchase order entered. And the reason we ask for those purchase orders is because multiple student lines get affected on some invoices. There could be 5 to 6 expense lines that need to be hit. So we find it easier for the special ed department to enter those accounts in a purchase order, and that way when it comes to accounts payable, it's clearly defined and it gets paid appropriately. So we often, you know, we try to plead our case to the auditors, and they say, well, it goes against what your purchasing policy says, and that you put in a purchase order before you order or get the service, or you don't do it at all. You know, and then you're fine if you don't do it at all, I guess, which kind of, to me, feels, we could keep, you know, we can always tighten that ship, always. So we just monitor that as well, and, you know, when we see it happen, we always bring it to the attention of somebody, and so it might be somebody new, it might be a new CAS that just forgot, or, you know, there's just always that. But I feel like we've worked really hard to keep that from happening as much as possible. So those were the management letter discussions and our responses to those. I think you have that too.
Other questions? Right, David,
And-
do you need an action to approve this component?
No, because it's just a
Just a
it's a
Really an
supplement.
update to the,
The only thing that we would need your signature on, and then I think also was included in this packet, is the annual financial management questionnaire that is required by the Vermont auditor. And so that is also attached, and it just requires your signature, Elizabeth,
And-
so.
Do I have that? I've got it, okay.
Okay.
Great. All right. Thanks.
Okay,
thanks, Amity.
you're welcome.
Move on to 2.1.
So 2.1, it's in your packet too. Treatment of students, parents, and guardians. This is provided to you in the similar format with highlighted changes. Happy to, I think probably easiest is for you to ask me questions specific to what's in there.
Can you just clarify in this one where the highlighted areas, new evidence or?
Highlighted areas
just
are the
current.
things that we have changed from the previous report.
Is the detail policy 6 and 7 consistent with our recent change in video policy? Does this have to change at all? I mean, I don't have that policy with me, but I would think it does need to be changed. But that means it's a policy change, which we have to warn and,
Not sure, Martin.
yeah,
You gotta
we need-
do a crosswalk, I guess, on that.
yeah.
Mhm.
So we probably want to check that for next time, but, no, that's the only question I had on this one.
There questions or comments?
So we'll look at the connection to the security camera policy and bring it back.
We can put this one back on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I guess one other question though. Seems to be a doubling of requests by the police to review recordings. I mean, I've also heard that there's been more fights this year. Is that related to that? I mean, if you can comment on that at all?
No, we've definitely seen this year an uptick in kind of physical activity going on at the high school. Don't really know why, more than we've ever seen probably in the past years, and when I say we, the administration and staff are working hard to try to get that back in check. I would like to say that it was really, really heavy in the very beginning of the school year. And things seem to have subsided a bit, but I don't really know why. But that's true. It's been an increase.
So, I mean, is that something that, I'm wondering, should we have the SRO and administration just to report out on that and explain what is being done about that? I would think the community would be interested, and this is something I've heard in the community, this kind of concern.
It's, you guys, you could, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to, in connection with coming back with the policy update, just give you a little bit about, some of the things that have happened there and what we're doing, if you would like. School resource officer.
I think that'd be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to not second, but support Martin in that request. And also, it's worth noting that a few weeks ago, I forgot his name, but he's the, not the school resource officer, but he's also the lacrosse coach. He wrote a commentary on VT Digger about the vaping crisis that I will talk endlessly about, but it also mentioned that there was a pretty serious fight in which one kid ended up with broken ribs, and the fight was started over a transaction of vaping equipment amongst 14-year-olds. So I'm interested in knowing, what are the causes? Can these causes of these fights be classified? Are they drug related? Are they romantically related or whatever? And could these details be brought to the board in some appropriate way that we're not micromanaging, but we're just keeping informed?
Yeah, Gar Smith is the individual you're talking
Okay,
about.
thank you.
He does coach lacrosse.
Yep.
But he's been obviously a big part of, our student, it's our SAP, right? A student Mariah Larkin Daniel position in the past. I'm
Yeah.
drawing a blank on that exact title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
SAP, great, thanks. So we certainly could do that. So let me just see, we bring it back on the policy, give you a little bit of an update on
Okay.
on why.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a matter of affecting this particular policy, but just to know what's going on, because we're getting feedback from the community and don't want to be caught unaware if this is a trend, and it's certainly something we need to get on. I mean, the school year is almost over, but it's,
Well, I
Urgent,
don't
no
want
matter.
you to think that we're not on it.
oh, yeah, I
right?
know,
We're responding to it, so I think that's important.
yeah. But bringing us the details is what I'm asking for.
Right,
But it
that's-
does feed into work that we're doing. I think Pat Burke has it well in hand. He and the assistant principals are working very hard to figure out exactly what's been happening and why. But it does feed into our other work, and one of the
Facilities.
facilities is a big part of it, and being able to supervise kids better, and being able to build community in a different way is something that's come up in our working group several times, and it would be helpful, as Alex says, to know a little bit more about that situation, a few more details, so that we can assess whether there's a real need there or not in some of our other work.
Yeah.
If I may just add the student's perspective, I've been a student in this district since preschool, and it has always seemed like fighting and bullying that has seemed like something that you'd see in TV, and so I feel like the administrations that I've experienced have done a really great job doing to mitigate that, and this year was an anomaly, and after that first quarter, there was obviously a change that happened somewhere, and it was addressed, and the fighting and those type of altercations just seemed to have gone away. There was definitely the problems at the beginning of the year, and the administration and the school resource officer had obviously done something working with students. I'm not entirely sure, but it does feel like the school community is back on track to what it was.
That's good to hear. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that
it is.
perspective.
Feedback call.
Right, great.
Great, we'll bring it back.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 10, negotiations update. Bridget, you want to take that?
First on the support staff, we, last Monday, not this most recent one, but the one before, we came to an agreement with the support staff. I won't share details of it until we've ratified. I got a notice today that the union has ratified the contract. So it will come to us. We'll need to make sure that we plan that into our agenda for the next school board meeting so we can get that ratified. So that was very positive that we've moved forward on that one. Today we had a mediator in to work with us and with the SBEA, the teachers union. We started at 9 this morning and worked almost up till 6. We broke just a few minutes before 6 to give us a slight breather before executive session started for this meeting. And we did not reach an agreement with the union. And so the next step would really be to schedule fact-finding, which is the next step in that process. And I believe that that sort of counsel for both sides or assistants for both sides are working on trying to find a date and trying to find a fact-finder who would be acceptable to both sides.
Okay. Agenda item 11, setting the agenda. Excuse me.
So you did 210, you can take that one off. Would you like some more?
Some water.
So we can take 210 off. Financial conditions and activities, you can take off. Treatment of students on, and the superintendent stay on. What else did we have on the previous one,
I don't know if we just add it as a bullet point under negotiation, that ratification of the contract with the support staff.
Yep, that's good.
Should go under
Support
negotiations.
staff. Union ratification, yeah. Okay,
We passed the school board, or the district calendar, we just took action,
Mhm.
right? So we can take
Oh,
9 off.
Yep, thank you. Delanna's probably already ahead of that, so. Okay.
Get it covered?
Mhm.
All right.
Assessment thing, since we got all this stuff on our table.
Yeah, I haven't shared
today,
that
or-
with you yet, but you can, that's
Well,
certainly
just
your
since
call.
we took these things off, do we have time to add that?
Your call, Martin.
I'd rather not, but,
Elizabeth? Well, this is a, I mean, while you're
it
on
seemed
that,
like the right thing to
a
add.
quick segue, so you don't, these are examples of board self-assessment,
So we should talk about that, yeah, about these samples and how to proceed.
so we could add
So
that
let's
to the
put
May
that,
one.
let's put it on May 1.
Yeah, we can take it off of the future
Perfect.
agenda items.
Well, don't take it off yet, we'll take it off when you do it.
So it's gonna be
It's on the agenda, you can take it off.
Board self, yeah,
On the future agenda, I can take it off.
okay.
All right.
Mhm.
Okay, agenda item 12, have we covered all future agenda items with that conversation?
I think so.
I think so.
All right, agenda item 13, we need to consider the minutes of 3 different meetings, April 1, April 3, and April 8th. April 1 was a negotiation subcommittee meeting. Any changes or comments? April 3rd is a regular meeting with executive session and the public meeting of the 3rd. Any comments?
The only one I had was it was a strange one on page 3. I thought EIS stood for Environmental Impact Study. We have it in here as Epidemic Intelligence
Oh.
Service. It sounds like a phone autocorrect.
Wow.
Somehow got a hold of that one.
good catch.
So it's a tiny change, but yeah.
No, that's pretty
Yeah, yeah.
significant.
I think somebody put it in there just to see if we were.
We're
paying
reading?
attention. I'm
It was a
sure.
little Easter egg to make sure that I was actually reading the minutes before I approved them.
I was about to say that before you had pointed it out. I was gonna let you take credit for that.
Thanks, Alex.
I don't know if we have an update on this. It just jogged my memory that we were going to get an update on the security cameras on buses based on that conversation.
We'll bring that,
Okay.
I haven't gotten to that with
We'll
Gary.
hold that then.
Mhm.
And then the April 8th meeting was the Master Planning and Visioning Working Group. Any other changes on that? All right. So by consensus with that change, those are approved. And we'll move on to the consent agenda.
So you have, I'll just give you a quick overview here, the hires. All of the hires that are in here are a result of 1 year only. So these are individuals that came to us or were assigned into these positions, not all of them actually. Most of them were 1 year onlys. In other words, they signed a contract after July 15th. A couple of them are seeking additional FTEs. For instance, Chuck Soul is a little bit more. Helena Ganji Dooley is a little bit more because they were not full-time. This is that .3 and that .2 is part of the .5 addition in the budget. So you're seeing these all reflect for the FY 19-20 school year. Under retirement and resignations, again, saying goodbye to Jennifer Cox. She's done a wonderful job here at the middle school, serving students in our middle school, kind of our alternative program. I just want to make note of that for you. Krista Hurling has been a full-time, so this is a reduction. And again, Patrick can fill these through sections. But again, she's also the chair of the state board. Bill Minard, he has been a long, I don't know how many years. I want to say 40 probably.
I think one of them was 40, and I forget which one,
Yeah,
but we need to send him a
and
letter.
so, although he's been very fractional, this will actually, this is it, because he's been driver's ed for us, and as with many other things, but just so noted, he's been a very devoted employee to our district. Jennifer Quaveland is a slight reduction. Carol Wheeler has been a .8 at Rick Marcotte. She's also served Orchard prior to that. Again, also noted, she's been a long time, very dedicated staff member serving our students as well. And then lastly, there's a job share currently that you have information in and documentation about that, which has gained the support of both myself and Brent Kuhn. And then you have the bids in there. So again, just a quick overview. Really doesn't do it justice. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces in there, particularly on the retirements. So.
Just a quick question, David, on that.
Mhm.
Are you and Mr. Kuhn comfortable with the plan for covering absences on the job share?
Yes.
You are? Okay.
Okay, and included in this are the bid as well?
Yes, this Aruba switches. Sounds nice, doesn't it?
Yeah, really.
Switch and you're in Aruba. No.
That's right.
That's where the new school is being built.
There we go.
Cool.
With Cole's input. All right, any questions or comments?
Nope.
Seeing none. You don't need approval, but thank you for the update.
Mhm.
All right, agenda item 15, AP orders 37 and 38. Any additional questions or comments? All right, agenda item 16, we have an AP order check to the Howard Center in the amount of $68,037.05, and the Essex Westford Community Educational Center in the amount of $76,422.78. Do you want to just review those quickly, David?
So one's for our tech, the 76,000 is for the Essex Westford Tech Program,
Center, yeah.
our students.
How many students does that represent?
Not absolutely positive of that number. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Not even like how many students are actually attending right now. They do
Oh.
an average of 6 semesters, so it goes back 3 years. That's how they bill you.
Oh, I see, thank you,
That's how tech works.
thank you.
Much different than
Yeah, thanks.
And the other one is the $68,000 one is for our Howard Center services for outplaced students.
So I'll move that we approve the accounts payable order check to Howard Center for Human Services in the amount of $68,037.05, and the Essex Westford Community Education Center in the amount of $76,422.78.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye?
Those are approved.
Great,
I
thank you.
move that we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Yes,
All in
you
favor?
deserve that one today.
Oh, you got that quick.
I should have let Brian, I should have let Brian.
Yes, yeah, well.
We are adjourned.
Well, I worked so hard, I read everything.